This came up last weekend, Adam. I had the most wonderful experience being the speaker at a women's Lenten retreat at my home parish where Marty and I attend, and that is St. Mary's and St. Juan Diego in Chandler, Arizona. And the women were just phenomenal, and they were really deep, and they wanted to be changed and really feel about suffering in a different way. And that was the title of the talk, let your suffering work for you. And towards the end of the Lenten retreat, of course, I encouraged everyone, Adam, like I always do, to tune in to Take Two with Jerry and Debbie weekdays, and the Spirit World with Adam Blai on Saturdays. And one lady was so nice. She raised her hand, and I said, "Yes, ma'am." And she said, I thought religious demonologists and exorcists have to be priests. And then it got this whole discussion on who you are, what you do. And so we know that we have brand new listeners pretty much every time we do this live broadcast. Okay, we know that. So, and folks are moving into town, finding out that we have Guadalupe Radio Network and Morning Joy and the other affiliates like Catholic Spirit Radio and Aquinas Communications. And so we have new listeners. So I think even though some of our regular followers have heard this, many times, I think every couple months we need to go over this. So Adam, you are a religious demonologist, you are a lay person, and you are a peritus, which is an expert in this field, a church-decreed expert. Would you please go over all of that for us? As a lay person, Adam is not a priest. He is not a deacon. He's not a clergy member. He is a lay person. And so let's really talk about that. And then, Adam, I think it's only fair on the second segment, we go into, again, the, I guess, levels or degrees or whatever of demonic activity. Because, again, people are contacting us on the spirit world thinking that their spouse or their child is possessed. And it's just not true.
Yeah. Okay, so good question, and a natural enough question. So I guess for 20 years now, pretty much this year, God has kind of pulled me into a very unusual life, and that is becoming an expert in exorcism in the Catholic Church. And so what does that mean? Well, I got kind of pulled into this by divine providence, I believe. And I say that now because it's been so many years and the bishops have continued to ask me to teach. And that wouldn't happen, and it wouldn't happen for 20 years, I don't believe, unless it was God's will. Because it's so unusual for a layperson to be an expert in this area. So, yeah, I don't do exorcisms because the rubric for the exorcism rite of the Roman Catholic Church says it has to be a priest with permission from their bishop. But I've been at so many, somewhere north of 2,000 exorcisms, and I've been to Rome and enjoyed the benefit of being, at private meetings with Father Amorth and the other guys in Rome that had 40, 50 years under their belt. And just, I guess, picked up experience over time. And in terms of the titles, so peritus just means expert. It's not only applied to what I'm doing. It could be used in anything. And the Church tends to formally recognize expertise when somebody's going to serve the Church in some job or ministry, that the Church needs to formally recognize a competence in that area. So, for instance, I teach sometimes at seminaries. Well, in order for me to teach seminarians in the Catholic Church at a Roman Catholic seminary, there has to be a formal recognition of my expertise, whether I'm teaching mathematics or theology or exorcism. And since exorcism has no degree where you can say, well, I got my master's in exorcism and so I'm qualified to teach at the seminary, it is done by the recognition of a bishop by decree. Okay. We've done this before, but I'll briefly read you the decree that my bishop wrote for me or about me in 2010. For assistance to the pastoral care of the faithful of the Diocese of Pittsburgh in accord with Canon 228, paragraph 2, the rite of exorcism, number 17, and the diocesan policy regarding the ministry of exorcism, I hereby appoint Mr. Adam Blai as Peritus, parentheses, expert, to the Diocese of Pittsburgh in regard to the ministry of exorcism. With this decree, I grant to Mr. Blai the permission to collaborate with the team of priests who minister in the various aspects of exorcism due to his expertise and experience in the psychological science, expertise regarding exorcism and demonology, particularly Christian demonology, and for assistance in prayer and witness during actual exorcisms of persons, objects, or places. This appointment is granted ad nutum episcopi, and that's basically at the pleasure of the bishop for as long as the bishop wishes. And, any appointment can be removed at any time by a bishop. And that was in 4th day of August 2010. So, people wonder about, religious demonology, and that just would be, the study of these fallen angels. You have to know a little bit about them, because if you're going to be going to exorcisms and helping out in various ways, and if you're going to be teaching priests about it, you need to understand the creature that the church is having them combat.
Okay, so you've studied religious demonology, so it's a study of that. Is it safe to say that you train and coach priests? The priests are the exorcists that have been appointed by the bishops, but you have been designated as one of those teachers in that capacity, correct? Yeah.
Okay. So I've taught at clergy days, where all the priests of a diocese come together under their bishop for a formal day of training. I've taught at national and international conferences for priests on this topic. I've taught at seminaries for this topic. I've taught at the Pope Leo XIII Exorcism School in Chicago, which is the school officially endorsed by the USCCB bishops and recognized, as the place to send your guys for training. So and then of course I go to exorcisms every week, about 50 weeks out of every year, and basically coach, because the best way to learn is in this situation.
So when this wonderful lady who was at this Lenten retreat, when she said, I thought that, a layperson couldn't be an exorcist. You are not, as is true, you are not an exorcist. You basically train exorcists.
Right.
Okay, so I think we solved that, and that was really good. Thank you for clarifying all that again. And again, I know that our listeners who are with us from day one, you're like, why do they keep going over this? Because people keep asking, because it's a very unique position, and it's
unusual, and it probably. It's an odd thing that happened in this generation, partly because there was so very few exorcists 20 years ago in the United States, probably somewhere around 20 in the entire country, some of which were very old, and there wasn't much support for them. And things have changed a lot now, 20 years later, but at the time, there were relatively few experts around. And it's not just because there was few experts around. God, I believe, wants me doing this, because now there's a lot of good experts around, but I'm still teaching. And I would be okay if he didn't want me to teach anymore. I'd be fine with that. I'd want to be obedient, to the will of God. But he apparently still wants me out here. So.
Right. And you're in exorcism ministry work on a regular basis with cases, working with possessed individuals every Friday, right? Okay. So you're actively involved in this work. Also, Adam, just to make sure that we can better understand this for our new listeners, bishops are exorcists. So bishops are exorcists, and then bishops can appoint an exorcist priest in their diocese and to fulfill that function. Could they also tap a deacon?
No. And actually, this is an interesting point that many people misunderstand, Deb. There's an assumption buried in what you said that's a common misunderstanding. The idea that a priest is not an exorcist until the bishop tells him to do it.
Right. He is an exorcist. He just doesn't have the
permission.
Permission. Right. I'm sorry. So he has the fact he can do it. He just doesn't have the permission. Go ahead.
Right. So with priestly ordination, historically, you would be ordained in different levels leading up to finally being ordained a priest. So there'd be porter and lector, and exorcist would be one of the ordinations you would be given. And they would hand the exorcism book to the person as they ordain them an exorcist, and then immediately take it back and say, but you can't use this until you're
right.
told to.
Right.
So they have the power, what we would call the faculty in canon law. They have the faculty in them, okay, which is given by God at their priestly ordination, because the exorcism piece is part of the priestly ordination. But they can't use it licitly without a bishop's permission.
Right.
And interestingly, if you had a possessed person sitting in the chair and the demon's active, if, say a visiting priest that's there for training hasn't gotten the okay from the local bishop to jump in and say some of the prayers that day, they know that, even though they've never met this person, the human has no idea who this extra priest is. The demon will correctly turn and say, him and him I have to listen to, but you don't have authority here. I'm not going to listen to a word that you say. And then if they step out in the hall and we call the bishop on the cell phone and the bishop gives verbal permission and we walk back in, the person didn't overhear any of that, but the demon then knows. Spiritually, things have changed.
So the demons recognize that authority.
They recognize the authority.
Now the bishops don't have to get permission. They automatically can use that faculty, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Go over real quickly the levels of demonic activity, because in one of the promos that we have on the Guadalupe Radio Network, we talk about the demonic activity is on the rise, and so talk to us about what this activity is and the different levels, and how temptation is really what is most often what we face.
Right. Yeah. Again, buried in this is the really fruitful thing is often unspoken when people talk about the levels of demonic activity, and you touched on it. So people get upset by the idea of like, demons are around in the world and they're attacking certain people, and I hope I never get attacked, and wouldn't that be awful? And I'm going to say lots of prayers to make sure that never happens to me. But we need to remember that these are fallen creatures, that God has allowed them to continue to exist, and he gives them license to do what? To tempt us. We saw it in the garden in Genesis. We see it when Jesus goes into the desert, and he's tempted by Satan personally. We see it in various places. God allows temptation. That's their what we call ordinary activity, okay? Meaning their day-to-day job. If they had time cards, they would punch their card and set about tempting people for the day, except they never sleep and they never go off the clock. Okay, so don't be freaked out by the idea that these creatures are around. They're around tempting all of us, those of us making this radio show right now, those of us listening. It's a human thing, okay? And the way I like to describe it is, it's like bacteria, okay? If I told you there's this invisible force that you can't see, but it's basically everywhere, and if you interact it in the wrong way and don't wash your hands and don't exercise good hygiene, you could get really sick, and certain bacteria, you could die. Well, you would say, oh my gosh, there's this scary invisible thing everywhere. And, when you first learned about it as a kid, it might freak you out. But then eventually you realize, like, okay, it's just everywhere. It's not pretty, but I accept it. It's just a fact of life, and I wash my hands. Well, this is the spiritual version of that, okay? They're around, they're basically everywhere, more or less. And how do we wash our hands and stay clean? We go to confession. We pray. We go to Mass. We live a good Christian spiritual life. And those basics, the bread and butter of our life, our sacramental life as Catholics, that's what you need to be doing. I get all the time people getting worked up and saying like, oh, I just learned about there's these things running around, and, I need to say these special prayers from Saint so-and-so, otherwise the devil's going to get me. And it's like, no, just do the basics. Stay in a state of grace, receive communion, like say your prayers every day in a joyful, thankful way to God for the fact that you're alive, and whatever else you want to be thankful for, petition him, whatever it might be. But don't think that, like, I have to say this extra stuff to protect myself, as if the devil is, like, running free, just doing whatever he wants. He's on a leash. And if you want to see it spelled out, go to the book of Job in the Old Testament. So that's my soapbox about to not let these things become bigger than they really are. They're just a part of life. Okay. So there's basically 4 levels, Deb. There's different translations from the Latin, so you get slightly different words. But it's basically when they're doing extraordinary, not ordinary, remember, ordinary is temptation, when they're doing extraordinary things in a place or to a person, or they take over a person. Those are the 3 levels. And sometimes the words used are demonic infestation for when they're in a place, and they're not just hanging out tempting whoever's in that place, but they're throwing stuff around the room, or there's black shadows you can't explain moving around, or sudden terrible odors that can't be debunked or discovered, and they instantly disappear. On, and people are scratched when they spend the night there, and, you know, they all have the same terrible dream, whatever it might be. Okay, so we would call that a demonic infestation, and that just means somehow somebody with authority over that place, a human who was the owner of it, did something to give them license to do more, basically permission and invitation. And then there's attacks on a person, which is often translated either into obsession or oppression, so demonic oppression, demonic obsession. And that's basically a personal attack that's extraordinary, and that's designed to wear a person down, to isolate them, and to drive them ultimately to take their own life. That's the end goal. And why is that the end goal? Because us dying is not the goal at all. They don't want to kill us. They want us spiritually dead. They want us damned. That's what they're after, is to separate us from God. It's a sour grape story. They were with God. They got separated from God, though theologians believe they didn't have the beatific vision before they were tested. But they were in heaven, but they didn't have the full beatific vision before they were tested at the beginning, the angels. But they had it. They were in heaven. They're separated. We were separated from God in the garden, right? God walked with Adam, person to person, had talks with him. We're separated. We can make it back to God through Jesus Christ. They can't. And so they want to steal as many of us away from that beautiful opportunity that we have that they've lost. So the attack on the person is to wear the person down. And then possession is the one that most people have heard about from the movies. And that is when a person has given in to them in some clear way, usually in the form of black magic. Some kind of occult activity usually is involved to take over the body. Not the soul and not the mind. They might stop the mind, but they can't force your will. You always have free will. And the soul is God's. So they can't steal a soul. They can't control where a soul goes when we die. Our soul goes to its judgment just like everybody else if a person is possessed. And then God decides where that soul goes because God owns it. God made it. It's his. Okay? But that's their goal, is to try to steal us away from God. And when the church does these exorcisms, it's an attempt to wrest the person out of that extraordinary hold.
Okay, so that was excellent the way you described that so quickly. I don't want to disappoint our wonderful listeners, so you only have like less than a minute. Tell us one thing you've seen in the exorcism work that you've done when you're in those sessions that we don't know about.
Well, you know, something beautiful that we see sometimes is, and God does this, so in the midst of, you know, the exorcism rite is a book. So there's a text that the priest reads, prays. And sometimes, you know, they may pause and interject a Hail Mary and Our Father, but basically they're reading from a book. I've seen a number of times, Deb, where for whatever reason, the demon that's present at the moment that's, you know, church is praying to evict it from this person and get them freed. God compels them to go to the floor on their knees and prostrate themselves before the tabernacle. Wow. And then in many cases, when we see that happening, it's not us forcing anything. It's just them kind of shaking and getting up and kneeling prostrate. Mm-hmm. As a sign of their departure, sometimes the exorcist will say, "Pray the glory be," as a sign that you're truly leaving. And believe me, that's, you know, for them, that's awful and humiliating. But they do it because if God says do it, you do it,
Right.
even if you're a fallen angel. And the fact that they're prostrate before the tabernacle is an encouragement to the person that's possessed and everybody else in the room.
Right. Wow. Well, Adam, we pray for you and the team that works in the exorcism world every Friday. So just be assured of our prayers. And please, folks, join us tomorrow, 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern for the Spirit World Open Forum. And now we'll send it back to Keith.